10 years. That is how long Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates have committed to Ukraine as a defense partner. 10 years, not a statement of solidarity, not a temporary arrangement to be reviewed when the headlines change. A decade-long contractual relationship, signed during an active war, between three of the wealthiest and most strategically consequential nations in the Middle East, and a country that, 2 months before those contracts were signed, none of them were treating as a defense partner at all. 10 years. 10 years of drone supply. 10 years of air defense expertise. 10 years of operational collaboration between the Gulf states and a country that learned everything it knows about defending against Shaheds by being bombarded with them every night for 4 years. The deal did not happen because Kyiv lobbied hard enough, or because Western pressure encouraged the Gulf states to diversify their partnerships. It happened because Iran's drones were in the air over Gulf cities, and Ukraine was the only country on Earth with a proven, affordable, combat-tested answer to them. It happened because the weapon Russia had been using against Ukraine for 4 years is the same weapon Iran turned on its neighbors. And it happened because Russia, the nation those Gulf states had been quietly moving toward as an alternative security partner, is the country that helped Iran build and deploy that weapon in the first place. One decision: Russia aligns with Iran. Iran attacks the Gulf. The Gulf needs Ukraine. 10 years. In this video, we are going to look at exactly how Ukraine's battlefield performance in the months before the Iran war created the foundation of credibility that made the Gulf deals possible, how a single weapon, the Shahed drone, connects Russia, Iran, Ukraine, and the Gulf states in a chain of cause and consequence that has redrawn the geopolitical map of the Middle East, what Ukraine is now extracting from its new partnerships that directly counters Russia's most powerful remaining leverage, and why the 10-year Gulf contracts are not just a diplomatic achievement but the opening move in a permanent restructuring of global power that Putin never saw coming and cannot now reverse. But first, let us look at why the Gulf states were ready to sign anything Ukraine put in front of them. Because the answer is not just the Shahed. It is what Ukraine proved about itself in the months before Operation Epic Fury ever began. The Gulf states do not sign decade-long defense contracts based on reputation alone. They sign them based on results. And the results Ukraine is producing on the battlefield in March and April of 2026 are the kind that make defense ministries in Riyadh, Doha, and Abu Dhabi pay attention to what Ukraine actually is, not what it was in 2022 when the world sent helmets and hoped for the best. March and April represent Russia's worst 2 consecutive months of the Ukraine war since 2024. In March, Russia achieves practically zero meaningful territorial gains across the entire Eastern Front. In April, it gets worse. Russia records its first net territorial loss since August of 2024, the month Ukraine launched its counterinvasion of the Kursk region and forced Putin to burn through more than 63,000 soldiers, including 4,000 North Korean troops, to claw back territory on his own soil. That same Kursk operation demonstrated something the Gulf states file away carefully. When Ukraine goes on the offensive, Russia has no reliable answer. The southeast counteroffensive that follows adds to the picture. Ukraine reclaims roughly 10% of the territory Russia took in 2025, methodically, using drone-supported operations that expose the brittleness of Russian supply lines and command structures. Meanwhile, Russia's casualty rate holds at approximately 35,000 soldiers per month, a consumption rate that, compounded across the war's timeline, has produced 1.3 million dead or seriously wounded. And Ukraine has begun targeting Russia's Baltic Sea oil export infrastructure, putting approximately 40% of Russia's total oil export capacity offline with precision deep strikes. This is the Ukraine that the Gulf states are evaluating when Zelensky arrives on his Middle East tour. Not the Ukraine of 2022, desperate, outgunned, waiting to see whether the West would supply enough weapons to survive the month. The Ukraine of 2026, advancing on its own terms, destroying Russian infrastructure at will, building weapons at scale that no nation had previously produced in combat conditions, and demonstrating a level of strategic adaptability that makes it more valuable as a partner than almost any conventional military power on Earth. The proof is not in the pitch deck, it is in the battlefield. And the battlefield is the most persuasive sales document Ukraine has ever produced. Until now, the Gulf states had sympathy for Ukraine but no strategic need for it. What changed was not Ukraine. What changed was the drone. Until now. The Shahed is the weapon that connects everything. Understanding how one drone type links Russia, Iran, the Gulf states, and Ukraine into a single strategic chain is the key to understanding why Ukraine's position in global geopolitics has shifted so completely in 2 months. Iran designs the Shahed. Iran deploys it against its adversaries, including Gulf states, for years before Operation Epic Fury begins. Then, in 2022, Iran licenses the technology to Russia and supplies Shaheds directly to Russian forces. Russia uses them to bombard Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian power stations, Ukrainian water infrastructure. Night after night, wave after wave, Russia fires Iranian-designed drones at a country that had done nothing to Iran. Ukraine has no choice but to build a counter. 4 years of live combat against Shaheds produces something that no other nation possesses: genuine operational expertise in defeating this specific weapon at scale. Ukraine achieves a 90% interception rate in March of 2026. It builds its own interceptor drones that destroy Shaheds for $1,000 each, a cost ratio of up to 50 to 1 against the incoming weapon. It builds electronic warfare systems tuned specifically to Shahed navigation frequencies. It constructs a layered, multi-domain air defense architecture in which every component is calibrated against the Shahed's specific performance characteristics and countermeasures. Ukraine does not just learn to stop Shaheds, it becomes the world authority on stopping them. Then Operation Epic Fury begins. Then Iran deploys its Shaheds against Gulf cities. And the Gulf states discover that the country that knows more about stopping Shaheds than any other nation on Earth is Ukraine, the country Russia has been trying to erase with those same weapons for 4 years. The circular irony is complete. Russia adopts Iran's weapon to attack Ukraine. Ukraine develops the world's best counter to that weapon. Iran uses the weapon against Russia's Gulf partners. Russia's Gulf partners pay Ukraine to defend them with the counter Russia's own attack forced Ukraine to build. Russia handed Ukraine its Gulf contracts, not intentionally, not strategically, by deciding that Shaheds were the right weapon to use against Kyiv's power grid. Think about what that means at the operational level. Ukraine's military experts are not showing up to the Gulf with theoretical models and laboratory results. They are arriving with 4 years of live data. Interception rates broken down by drone variant, electronic warfare effectiveness against specific navigation systems, optimal deployment geometry for layered interceptor networks, real-world performance degradation curves for Shahed countermeasures at different engagement densities. The Gulf states have sophisticated air forces. They have Patriot systems and advanced radars. What they do not have is the specific, granular, hard-won operational knowledge that Ukraine accumulated in 4 years of being the target. By mid-March, 200 Ukrainian military experts are on the ground in Gulf states, setting up interception networks. By mid-April, they are not just advising, they are operating. Ukrainian personnel, using Ukrainian interceptor technology, actively shooting down Iranian Shaheds in Gulf airspace. Ukraine's operators are in combat on behalf of Gulf partners, doing the same job they do every night in Ukraine against the same weapon in a different country. This is drone diplomacy at its most direct, and it is pulling results that no conventional diplomatic initiative could produce in the same time frame. Now, let us look at what Ukraine extracts from these relationships, because the Gulf deals are not acts of charity in either direction, and the specific terms of what flows back to Ukraine tell you exactly which of Russia's most powerful remaining leverage points are being neutralized. Energy is the first. Russia's winter campaign against Ukrainian infrastructure is designed to create an energy crisis that breaks civilian resilience and forces political concessions. The strategy is straightforward. Destroy the substations, the heating plants, the transmission lines, create darkness and cold on a scale that makes ordinary life in Ukraine's cities unbearable, and apply that unbearability as political pressure. It is a strategy that requires Ukraine to have no alternative energy supply. The Gulf states eliminate that alternative. Saudi Arabia and Qatar supply Ukraine with oil and diesel that flows through European refineries into Ukraine's military and civilian supply chains. The energy that Russia destroys is replaced by supply that Russian missiles cannot interdict. The lever that Moscow spent the entire previous winter pulling is no longer attached to anything, and simultaneously, Ukraine's offensive strikes remove Russia's ability to use energy as a tool of influence elsewhere. 40% of Russia's Baltic Sea oil export infrastructure is taken offline by Ukrainian deep strikes. The revenue Russia uses to fund the war, subsidize the domestic economy, and purchase loyalty from energy-dependent nations' contracts. Russia cannot export what Ukraine is destroying. It cannot use energy as currency when the infrastructure that monetizes the energy is burning. The European deals add further layers. Germany provides hundreds of Patriot missiles in exchange for access to Ukraine's battlefield data, the real-world performance records of advanced weapon systems tested against Russian attacks under live combat conditions. No simulation, no controlled test environment, no laboratory produces the depth of data that Ukraine generates every time Russia fires a hypersonic missile or launches a cruise missile wave. Germany is buying something irreplaceable, and it is paying in the air defense systems Ukraine needs most. Norway partners with Ukraine on Shahed drone intelligence. The Netherlands signs a joint drone production agreement. Ukraine opens a diplomatic channel to Turkey, a NATO member whose relationship with Moscow on weapons procurement has historically complicated alliance cohesion, demonstrating that Ukrainian diplomatic reach now extends into spaces that even Washington finds difficult to navigate cleanly. Each of these agreements has a structural feature in common. The partner nation acquires a direct stake in Ukraine's continued functioning as an independent state. German access to battlefield data ends if Ukraine falls. Gulf interception expertise ends if Ukraine falls. Norwegian drone intelligence ends if Ukraine falls. Dutch joint production ends if Ukraine falls. Ukraine has built a web of dependencies that turns its own survival into other nations' strategic interest. The logic of dependency, which Russia has used for decades to maintain leverage over smaller states, is now operating in Ukraine's favor, not Moscow's. Here is where the consequences for Russia at the negotiating table become irreversible. Russia's entire peace negotiation strategy rests on the claim that time is on its side, that Ukraine is exhausted, that Western support is finite, that the accumulation of Russian pressure will eventually produce a Ukraine willing to accept territorial concessions, security guarantees that preclude NATO membership, and a political settlement that locks in Russian gains. The strategy requires the world to believe that Ukraine cannot sustain itself independently, that it is perpetually one Western decision away from collapse. The Gulf deals make that claim unsustainable in front of any audience that can read a contract. A nation that Gulf states are committing to for a decade is not a nation on the verge of collapse. A nation that Germany is trading its most advanced air defense missiles to in exchange for operational knowledge is not a nation running out of things to offer. A nation whose military experts are deployed and fighting in active combat theaters on other nations' behalf is not a nation struggling to field enough soldiers to hold its own front line. Ukraine's new geopolitical position directly contradicts every premise on which Russia's negotiating stance depends, and Russia cannot rebuild the position it has lost. The structural damage is permanent in the ways that matter most. Russia's arms exports have fallen 64% over 5 years. The European Union now sells 4 times as many weapons as Russia across the same period. Every potential arms customer that watched Russia fail to defeat Ukraine over 4 years has updated its assessment of what Russian weapons can actually do against a modern, motivated defense. The Gulf states that Russia was courting as clients are now decade-long partners of the country Russia has been fighting. The Iran partnership that was supposed to expand Russian influence in the Middle East instead handed that influence to Ukraine. The energy leverage that sustained Russian geopolitical currency is being dismantled by Ukrainian strikes and Gulf supply simultaneously. Russia built its global position on 3 pillars: military credibility, arms export relationships, and energy leverage. Ukraine has spent 4 years attacking the first, the second has collapsed in the market's response to the first, and the third is being removed from both ends simultaneously. The pillars are not weakening, they are being replaced by a Ukrainian architecture of defense partnerships, combat-proven technology exports, and strategic indispensability that did not exist 18 months ago and cannot now be undone. Russia planned for a world in which Ukraine was the problem that needed solving, and the Gulf states were the prizes to be won. It created a world in which Ukraine is the solution that the Gulf states are paying for, and Russia is the problem that made them need it. 10 years, 3 deals, 1 weapon that Russia gave Iran. Iran used against Russia's partners, and Ukraine learned to destroy. Russia handed Ukraine the contracts that will outlast this war. If you found value in this, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.